Okay, so I guess we'll get started. Some people are still arriving. So this week for this class, if you're in the 26 or the 27B, it's kind of similar. I try not to overlap the tools, but there are times that you're gonna see the same tools being used, just different steps. So this week we're gonna cover two chapters. One is gonna be chapter 2, and the chapter after that is gonna be chapter 3. So, on the high level for this class, it's gonna go over threat intelligence and how that relates to your to be an analyst or becoming a risk assessor. So when we take a look at the notes, I try to break it down to 2 chapters for you. And we are going to go through the notes and we're going to be able to answer some of the questions. So the first part, it's going to talk about threat intelligence. And this is going to be really looking at what you have in your environment or your infrastructure. You have to find as much information as you can, and that's part of the recon. So in reconnaissance, you are basically collecting information, and realistically, that could be people, systems, and there are 3 levels of threat intelligence. The first is going to be the strategic threat intelligence. This is going to be just the broad overview of your threats and who could be the threat actors. That could be attackers, it could be internal threats, and to understand the trends and the responses. So historically, we need to analyze what we're facing based on historical data, or if we don't have that kind of data, you have to understand the trends of what's coming to you. So we have to do a little bit of research on potential threats to a similar organization. The second part is going to be your tactical threat intelligence. This is more on technical and behavior of your system and people. So it's okay. So we want to be able to understand the technical behavior of the information. And then the third part is going to be operational, which is going to be detailed information that would allow threat response. So to answer the question, sorry, let me pull up the assignment. We are going to describe the 3, and you can pull that from the notes. But just to kind of give the overview on these, the notes giving you the definition, but we want to understand when we should use it. So for the first category, which is your strategic threat intelligence, this is used when you are creating security plans. That means that when we're building out some of the overlapping strategies on how we can protect our infrastructure, our system, or our people, right? Overall, this is when you would implement strategies on how you would pull all the information together and be able to build out security plans to address the gaps. So that means what? If you are facing problems with people leaving the door open or opening the doors for other people, part of the security plan would include user training and also procedures to address that, right? Meaning that we have to practice, just like how you have fire drill or earthquake drill. So it's not just good enough for us to say that, yes, we're going to put out the fire when it occurs. We also going to make sure that we practice it. So that way people know when and where to exit in case of emergency, the fire breaks out, right? And where to meet. So the same thing with security. When you have incidents and things like that, you have to implement procedures on how to be able to address it. Because when you're doing incident response, you don't know, if you don't practice it, you don't know how you're going to be able to approach it. So having the strategies in developing your security plans and all of that information can be gathered, right? We can interview people, we can look at system performance, we can take a look at all the attacks that had occurred over the years or even months or days, and how we responded to it, what's effective and what's not. So gathering information is important. Then the second piece is your tactical threat intelligence. This is really understanding the technical settings and configuration, right? The behavior of your system while implementing those settings, and how useful that is for your organization and professional. So when do we use tactical threat intelligence? When we're configuring our systems, especially security systems, your firewall, your intrusion detection system, right? So tactical threat is really belonging to the IT umbrella. If we're saying it's only going to be for security team, that's not true, because as you understand, the landscape of threat can be coming from different areas, including, right, including your networks, including all your system, your smart devices, so your endpoint, and also its user. So technical threat intelligence is when we have to understand, by gathering information, we have to understand what we're facing in the technical area. The operational threat intelligence, as we mentioned, this is detailed information on how we're responding to threats, where it's coming from, how it's changing throughout your environment, what is it capable of, what kind of behavior, and this really entails a lot of different things from malware to attackers, right? And how we can prevent it. So when should I use this? This is useful when I'm configuring, defending, and combating threats. So when you're responding to threats, when you're trying to prevent threats from happening, so we want to always be on a proactive, right, approach versus a reactive approach. So operational threats are usually, that's mostly in the area of security team and incident response, because we can deal with malware, right, where it's really originating from. Did somebody bring that through the USB? How can it change? Did it spread across the network through a system that's connected? What is it capable of? Is it deleting the files, or is it holding ransom? And what kind of behavior, additional behavior that you would see? So how can you prevent it? Does it mean that your security software is not working, right? And perhaps if we have the security software solution, is it being updated? So you have to take a look at how that is impacting the operation, right? That's hence operational threat. And you can pull this from Unit 2 notes, right? The categories are listed there. You just have to know when you should implement each category. So CYSA will ask you some additional high-level information about threats, because as an analyst, you most likely deal with this category a lot, these categories a lot. Then I kind of want to focus a little bit on malware today. So for number 2, right, we're gonna take a look at how virus share information is going to be given to us. So you can go to the link, or you can type that into your browser, and you can open that up, and we'll expand on the lecture a little bit more. So virusshare.com is a way that the community can share information about malware. You can also report it to your vendor or your service provider for security software. But when you take a look at the information here, if we're taking a look at malware as a threat, you often see it, because it is a file, right, virus, and even a Trojan, it needs, Trojan it's masquerade on the worm side, doesn't need your intervention, but it normally comes in at some type of file. So you would see its hash. This is the way that we can identify, or a way that the system actually sees that malicious file. Okay, the size of the file type, And then the MIME type. So it is a DOS executable. When you see this, what does that mean to you? It's Windows based, right? You can tell that here. It tells you that the match for this is Win32, so 32-bit executable. And then there's some impact with the driver and the detection. That means that how this could be related to other things, right? And it doesn't necessarily be, so some of the detection system pick it up. And that could be, Google was detected. So now, based on this list, this is what they had shared and what's pulled. Sometime not all antivirus software would detect such things, right? So like I said before, it is as good as its definition and signature. And so if you don't have that in for that software, it's not going to be able to find it. Okay. So for the question, it tells you to visit the site. And then you want to view the malware sample that's recently shared. What is its MD5 hash, the size, and the file type. So when you look into a threat, you have to write down its specific information, right? As an investigator, as an analyst, as a person that's looking at that threat could be negatively impacting your organization, you have to document that. Okay, so gathering intelligence, not just like scanning things and, so we have to be detail oriented in how we're writing things down. So the more description that you can give that piece of information, that can be important, right? We can categorize all of the data that we are obtaining and be able to say, okay, historically, did we have that type of malware, right? Could that, be a big threat? So let's say that it just impacted us. We had a user that downloaded this type of malware, then we have to make sure that we prevent it in the future. Okay? So you have to be able to write down what it is and how we can combat it. So I'm having you write down the hash, right? It's a good practice just to write down how the system identify it, what it is, and how that could be impacting your organization or your system. Any question? So now, let's switch back to the notes real quick. So you're gonna ask, well, how am I gonna know all of these threats? Nobody can know all the threats in the world, right? There are resources for you to be able to identify some of or get some update bulletin information or news feed. That's gonna be helpful. I know some of you are following certain type of channel or certain type of resource. So it is useful. These are some of the mainstream one that I had pulled. So you can look at Sunkey, you can look at Open Threat Exchange. OTX is very useful. And a lot of it is shared throughout the industry. So I provided the links here for you. And so if you need to do the research, you can go in and you can also like virus share. So there are specific type of threats. So if you're dealing with Microsoft, you can also go directly to Microsoft Threat Intelligence. There are different type of resources that you can find. So there are closed source and proprietary source intelligence. That means that there would be a company that they would have a database of threats. And in order for you to access that, you have to pay them some type of subscription or a solution for security, right? Some security company, they would make sure that they capitalize on it. So proprietary information. And it really depends on the organization. Sometimes you start your job as a security analyst in an organization that already have some kind of solution. So you can use something that's proprietary. There are also open source materials and resources out there. So you'll be able to also research, right? So people sell information and data all the time, and that's common in our industry. Okay, so when you are assessing threat, these 3 questions you need to ask yourself. Is it timely? Okay. Is the information accurate? And is it relevant? Okay. So because I myself, sometimes I go down that rabbit hole, and then next thing I know, I'm looking at some other things that's kind of related to where I start, because information can be very interesting and it can lead you to branches of it. So you always give yourself a time window on how soon or how quick the issue that you're facing needs to be addressed. And if your information is closely related, and is it accurate? Things that are published on websites doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. Remember, we talked about at least 3 to 5 level validation. So we want to make sure that we validate everything that we learn. Okay. All right. Confidence level. So whenever that you're dealing with a threat, if it's between 90 to 100% confirmed, that's pretty good. It's real. That means that it really is a threat, right? And sometimes you get the things that's kind of scare people, right? But not really. You know how whenever there's people say, oh, there's a storm coming, go and get your stuff, right? So it's more of like, okay, we know that potentially that could be harmful to us, but we just want to prepare, right? So in security world, that's also the same thing. People always gonna warn you, oh, this is potential threat, but is it really a real threat, right? So you would have these ranking of the confidence level in threats, and make sure we know this because certification will ask you, right? So when we are in a very low confidence level, likely that's not your priority. Okay. Sometime in the rare case that might be impacting you, but a lot of the times real threats have higher confidence level. Okay. Any question? Okay, so yeah.
So for talk about like closed party sources. Like what's stopping information being leaked from that like source? So hypothetically, someone pays to get that information and they just leak it out to them.
So there's agreement in how the service agreement and also license agreement. So if you're using a product, for example, I might have a management console for all my enterprise, right? And I paid, and it's giving me some threat intelligence through that software. There's agreement that you accept and the contract that you establish with that subscription, that if you leak that kind of information, so let's say that I share proprietary secrets of that particular software that I, purchase, I might have some copyright issues or face some kind of issues, consequences. So they can come back and sue you. So monetary wise, it's not to your benefit that you yourself pay for the product, but then share it to the rest of the world. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So some people, they would say that, I pay for that product, so my company has the right to use it. But yeah, there are service level agreements and things like that that are in place to protect the organization that provides that threat intelligence.
And
Yeah.
there's I guess follow up with the if aside from monetary value, is there any other reason to get like closed source?
I think some of it is also credibility to the organization. So if you have something that's very accurate, that's highly demanded, that also makes you a better security company, or, resource provider compared to others, right? So just like how you see some of the open source tools, it works, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. So their threat intelligence might be very effective, and how that can be applied to, their security appliance, for example, it is more effective in combating some of the threats coming in. So yeah, I think a lot of it, proprietary resources are high in price for that reason. It's, you're not just buying the brand, you're actually buying the quality. So yeah, good question. Any other questions? Okay, so we talked about the rating systems, and what you want to do is you want to look at some kind of management and exchange information that would standardize the process, because we want to have more of like an agreed type of process. So the structure of the threats, this is going to use the sticks information, and this can be seen in XML. So this could be useful for some type of technical tool that you use. So it's gonna give you attack patterns, identity of the threat, the category of the threats, and the actors and the tools that would be related to that threat. And because it's gonna be built very similar to what you've seen in relational database type of resource, you would see that you would have some kind of object model that would represent the relationship. So there are automated exchange protocol that's being used. So in some cases, you would see some of the tools in the market that has these things already integrated, right? Therefore, there's the demand for that type of tool. You would have the threat intelligence lifecycle. So they follow this to really build out some of the information for the threat. Okay. And a lot of that is a way that we can share and we can gather information. Industry trends, right? You have to conduct risk assessment. And then if you have breaches, you have to report it, because that's regulation, and compromise. So in the case that if it's you have an attack and they're targeting certain things, and as you go through it, you also have to contact law enforcement and sometimes FBI if it's jeopardizing national security, right? And so on. So there are certain procedures that you have to face. So when you assessing security breaches, a lot of the times you have, we always talk about how that quantify to the dollars, but a lot of it also has to do with, like how that impacting your assets, your organization and your operation overall. So these are some of the things that when I gather information, I have to take a look at, right? You need to look at your breaches, things that you have faced before. You need to assess information that would be the impact of the breach. Okay, if the company had never faced any kind of breaches before, more power to them, right? It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. So we have to look at the trend for a similar company, and then the control and the countermeasures for our threats. So let's take a look at the next part. I have you go into the CISA website. So you can click. And then what you're going to do is you are going to view a recent vulnerability. So we're going to go down to the bottom of the page, and we're going to try to find a vulnerability, and we're going to try to find it for a network appliance. I think they moved. Did you guys find it? Protect. So CISA is a really good resource for you to kind of get some information. Information's about things that could be impacted by the cyber attack. Let me see if I can find. I might have to relink this for you. Incident response, so I think they have moved this. We can search. Okay. So if you go to CISA website, you can search for vulnerability. And then you're gonna go to known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. So search here on the right side at the top for vulnerability. And it's gonna take you to this page, and then you can click the first link. So as you see, when you go down and you're gonna see the CVE, it stands for Common Vulnerability and Exposure. And each of these would have some kind of number attached to the CVE. This allows it to identify, or we use this to identify different common vulnerabilities. So you can go down and you can look for some of the ones that would be impacting. As you can see, there's some Microsoft Windows environment, webmail vulnerability. So this one is a Fortinet, right? It's Fortinet built appliances and their iOS. So you can also, so let's say I click this one. And then when you go down, you're going to see that it's going to tell you the version that's impacted for the iOS for that appliance. So when we say iOS, basically it's an operating system for that particular security appliance system. So likely it is embedded Linux. So here you would see that it talks about like the enumeration weakness and so on. So when you select one, once you find it, you're going to put down its VU, the general description, if there are other related CVE, and what kind of impact and what solution it has. So you can put down its ID. And then some of the general description about it, it would tell you like what kind of issue that it has. And you don't have to pick that one. You can find the one that would be just related to appliance. There's some server, endpoint manager for the mobile. So we can also pick like the Citrix. And as you can see, some of these, if they've been available for a while, you're going to have a base score. Okay. So there's general description. So that could be varied from one to the next one that you pick. So there are different ones that you can find. And after a while, you can see some kind of common trend. So let's say that if I'm looking at Cisco, right? I'm looking at like a Cisco voice over IP vulnerability. And then I'm going to look at another thing that's closely related to it. You're going to see a common trend with the type of vulnerability that you face. Because a threat is going to capitalize on your vulnerability for some type of attack or whatnot, right? Any question? So the way that we categorize this, so I want to show you how you can find information when you're doing information gathering, right? You're going to have the vulnerability unique ID. Often that you would see it's classified under CVE and then the value. So by practice, we would have the year and then the ID. Now on this one, if we're looking at this one, it says improper control generation of code injection in NetScaler ADC. Gateway allows the attacker to access, right? NSIP, CLIP, right? So if I'm using this particular type of appliance in my infrastructure, I would then have to take a look at how I can mitigate some of the risks for these areas. And it also have some low privilege for remote code execution. So we have to take a look at access control for executable code, right? So we have to go back and see how we can control permissions for that particular object. Now, sometimes we might not have the solution, right? They would give you some kind of advisory, but sometimes there are no solutions to some of the known threat. And known vulnerabilities, that's common. Right? If we have all the answers in the world, I don't think the security industry would grow this rapidly. Right? So we want, yes, question?
Like, in those cases, you just have to inform your company, like, hey, avoid this for now, let us be.
Yeah. So so you as an analyst have to recommend solutions, right? So if we're dealing with something like this, right, and we have to use that appliance, that's the only one we have, then what you have to do is you have to control other technical area, right? So you would recommend that these are some of the things, and you have to hit some of the things that they mentioned there, right? All the issues that it's facing. So you kind of have to build out some solution that would be able to address some of the problems it's going to face. Potentially that will impact us, right? So we would be able to control some execution for files for the code. And that could be potentially to the groups and the user or the system itself. Yeah, I mean, you can sandbox, you can research it, you can do a lot of the things, but you know, coming back to the question we said earlier, is it timely, right? So you have to come up with a solution in some kind of window of time instead of waiting it out for a long time to be able to fix the problem. Okay, so this is one of the resources that you can use. So as you collect the data for threat intelligence, you want to be able to meet the requirements, meaning that you have to focus on your goals. What are you gathering information for, right? We might not have any kind of security issues right now, but we want to be able to gather the information so that way we can see, right? We have an outlook of what could be coming. And that's a proactive approach. So once you have the data, the information that you need, you can process it and you can analyze it. A lot of this is statistical information, right? You might have a bunch of log files and, you know, some tools is going to be able to read all those files and it's going to tell you, oh, this is the trend that you have a brute force potential, right, for these particular accounts. Or it would say that, you know, your system performance is not to the baseline. So we want to make sure that we have our system health check, right? So you need to process the data. And what if you don't have those tools? You have to do it manually, right? There are tons of stuff that you can use for data analysis. We can look at, numerical processing for data, even using Python or even some of the tools that will be important. And then, so once you have the analysis, you would then write a report, and this goes to your supervisor, right? In my case, a lot of the time consultant would provide that to the client and then be able to, they would read it. Now they can disregard my recommendation. They can say, you know what, that's too expensive. We won't implement it. We will keep a lookout for it. We would try to, save up money and then be able to do that in 2 years. And with that, you want to also provide like, okay, what's the impact of them not implementing some of the security solutions? And what's the impact of them doing it, right? The comparison. And also the return on investment, so you can go further and be able to provide that type of resource and then have the feedback. Okay. So here I provide some information for you about how you can share and use some of the analysis resources. You can go to ISAC. And then with that, it breaks it into 3 areas for aviation, financial, and healthcare. Right? And then other sectors, like if you fall into like manufacturing or other areas, then you can go into other sectors here. So for threat actors, you're going to see this on a lot of security certifications. You got the nation state. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with this. This is usually, it could be, groups of individuals, right? Or sometimes that they are hired. They have tools and talents and equipment to do more advanced type of attacks. And sometimes you see this with APT. And if you Google APT, right, that list keeps on growing. And then you have organized crime. These are for financial gains. A lot of your phishing calls are part of the organized crime groups, right? They're trying to fish out your financial information, your login, and your credit card information for, could be identity theft. That's also organized crime. And then you have the hacktivists and like anonymous for a probable cause, and then insider threats. Those are common employees or people that's within the organization and you don't know they could potentially leak information or not, right? Okay, so for number 4, I have you go to Mandiant. And for the Mandiant, basically, we're going to take a look at the resources. So let's go here. And here it provides you with the open IOC, and this just to give you the format for the use case. So these are some of the use case that would be useful to you. So it says, how can an organization subscribe to open IOC platform to gather intelligence or threats? So with open IOC, you'll be able to have access to attributes or binary files. So that way, in the case of malware, we will be able to apply that and look at your malware in case you need to reverse engineer it. And so within that, you will be able to search for registered keys, because anytime that any software tools that comes into your system, right, it updates the registry, and especially in Windows environment. So you can search for specific registry keys because they would be able to provide that. So that way you can quickly identify the malware. You can use news feeds to identify information that would be related to connectivity, like public IP addresses, or hash values for the malware or its utility. And we can compare metadata of the files that would have execution tools or backdoors. So a lot of times when you see this, in the case of like rootkit, logic bomb, things like in those nature, likely that you have metadata files information. Now, not all malware would have any kind of backdoor, right? They are all different. So we want to make sure that we utilize resources to gather information about the malware. Remember what I said, right? Close to about 50% of the malware are not known. So you could be facing with a variation. Now, when someone take a malware program and then modify and write it, depending on how they modify it, sometime through the code, if the signature or the behavior of the malware is similar to something that's known, a lot of the time, right, the security software, the antivirus software, it's intuitive enough to see that kind of behavior and it's going to try to block it. Okay. But in the case that it's truly modified, in the nature of the malware, what you see is it's not able to detect it. But you can go from one to the next AV, it will not be able to, you know, sometimes some of them don't distinguish it. And you can see that on virus share. If you're looking at the virus share information, some of the known virus, some of your common AV is not listed even on it, right? So people ask me like, which AV is effective? Well, my answer is depends, right? It's right. A lot of times they're only about 60% effective. So having a security software on your system doesn't really guarantee you not having malware, right? Even using a VPN for every single connection doesn't guarantee that you don't download malicious files. So there's no guarantee in security world. And every time that we take an action or implement a solution, usually it's just, you know, we're hoping, right? And a lot of the time when we assess it based on the performance, the need of our system, we're just gonna say, okay, oh, in the long run, we can study how effective it is the first year, the second year, and the third year. Any question? So coming back here, what you see is you would, you know, it gives you some metadata. So you have to read through this to kind of get the information that I had put down there, right? The references for the malware information. And then you can also link to their RSS feed. All right, so let's talk about threat classification. We will need to do this, right? This is going to be your job. So we are going to first start with categorizing the threat, such as 0-day threats, right? And those are exploiting unknown vulnerabilities or known vulnerabilities that's not fixed out of the box in OSs, in software, in cars, on computer systems. So for Microsoft, STRIDE stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. Okay. So you can use this. Is this? So you ask yourself, does this spoof? Yes, it belongs to the STRIDE, right? Are they tampering my data? Yes, that belongs to the STRIDE. So it's a threat. Okay. You guys know what repudiation means? Modifying. So if we have some form of, let's say a log, when I log onto a system, it creates a timestamp, right? Whether I authenticate successfully or not, right? In the case if I am, right? Now, in the case where what repudiation is, that non-repudiation means that I cannot argue that I did not log in at that time because the log shows that I am, right? But if they go in and they delete the log, it's repudiation because now there's no record of me entering that system at that time. Understand? So an attacker can come in and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit the database and then move around and go back and delete the log that I actually access certain records on that database. So now it's repudiation. Because there's no argument, there's no way that I can identify that they were in there at that time. And this happens a lot with people, you know, with breach. Information disclosure, we can see this sometimes that surface on the dark web. Sometimes it would leak out to other entity. Denial of service, all that is just making your service unavailable to people, right? That could be your Wi-Fi, that could be your server. A lot of time it's web servers to target. Elevation of privilege, I come in as a regular user and I become a root user or super user or administrator, right? Somebody that's able to perform a certain task based on the need of the attack or the breach. And so you can look at other models like Pasta, Linden, and there's others. So depends. I found that this is kind of easy to remember, STRIDE. So the benefit of classifying the threats is that you are following a standardized process using common framework. And with that, you know, people across the world, let's say that you work for a company that's international, they're still going to be able to understand, right, the type of threats that you have identified. So it's kind of standardized practice. So when we look at the threat intelligence cycle, we're going to describe the activity that takes place in each phase. First, you're going to gather the requirements in historical, gather the requirements from historical breaches, trends, and risk assessment result. And assuming that has been done. Did you guys get to eat? Go ahead and eat. Not anymore? What?
Give us a break.
Not good. We're not starting.
Okay,
You're welcome to eat it.
just eat. Don't be shy. All right, B, collect the intelligence resources to meet the requirement. So first you have to say, okay, what's required, right? Second, then we're going to be able to collect the data for those requirements. Then not all data is good data. So we got to consolidate the data by processing it and analyzing it, right? Validate and consolidate. Once we have good data and analysis of that data, you're going to distribute it to the executives, the decision maker, and the operational team, likely, right? Your business managers, your IT managers, and your IT team. Then after that, we just obtain the feedback for future improvement because your report should be relevant should be real. And then there's always room for improvement. You can do a survey. Or ask people. So the purpose of ISACS and the 3 areas are, right? ISACS allows you to share information, tools, and assistance to other members. So you can register for a membership. The 3 areas are healthcare, financial, and aviation, and they do have other category if your company doesn't fall into those. The reason why those are in the focus is because those are highly impacted for security. And you find these on the websites and the notes. So the threat actors, we mentioned that earlier, nation state, your insiders. And those are the threat actors that have the most resources. The people that are within and the APT group, because they have access to more advanced tools and they might have advanced knowledge and skills. Those are talents, right? In general, we would say that the insider threats are the most dangerous. Why is that? Because we don't know when they're gonna act. It's really hard. It's harder to detect because they're already on the inside. So there have been cases, and you've seen this documented in movies, in articles, in journals, things like that. And in the case of like, if you're looking at whistleblower, right? That can classify under the insider threat, because if you're looking at Snowden, or in that case, like we don't know when, because he changed sides quickly, right? We don't know when that he's gonna leak that kind of information, and he had planned out on how the data can be obtained and shared. Even with background check, multiple levels, right? Training and so on. Sometimes people change. And you can also pull the information from the notes for STRIDE, right? Spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. So spoofing, MAC and IP, sometimes system names, tampering, modify, delete files or server objects, repudiation, change or delete logs. Information disclosure, distribute data to the dark web or other sources. And that could be monetary, for monetary reasons or not. In the case of hacktivists, they just leaked the data because they wanted to show the company that they could. Denial of service, just cripple resources and reduce its availability. Elevation of privilege, we talk about how the user rights are changed to higher privilege for unauthorized access. So for example, someone can be working for the company and they logged in as their boss, their supervisor, log in, pull some kind of data like client list, and then sells it. So we don't know, you know, they could put that on USB or they can upload it to their personal cloud. Personal cloud is questionable because, you know, the company doesn't own it. So in order to investigate it, you have to subpoena for the cloud company to, you know, if the user doesn't agree, you have to ask the cloud company to be able to give you access if you have other, like a court order. So elevation privilege doesn't necessarily mean that they put themselves into a different group membership, right? Like I'm a regular user and I throw myself into administrator. That's not always the case. It's something like password sharing that, their supervisor had asked them to log in to use the application multiple times, and they would log in, use the application, and send themselves checks, like paychecks. That happens too, right? Fraudulent cases, it could span in the area of strikes. Any question? So we talked about classifying threats and why is it useful. If you use a common framework to describe the threat, so we want to follow the framework, right? The industry already created the framework for you. It's kind of like, they already lay out the map and you just need to follow the road on that map. Okay, everything is templated and already built. And others, like professional, they're able to contribute and manage the information. So there are databases that you can submit new findings. And also, if it's already on the database, you can use it. So using a common framework is very helpful. Before we didn't have this, right? Everybody is kind of doing their own thing, and that can be very difficult. So as we standardize the practice in this, you want to use the common framework. And through that, you would know that the threats might already exist and you want to analyze it better. So someone has already found it, then you want to be able to contribute to that by finding additional information or behavior. Question.
With the question about with the Phoenix of clouds and all that, do clouds work the same way as a hard drive when you have to pass all type of information through it, or does it just get deleted once you delete it?
Yeah, so, but cloud storage servers, even when the user delete it, it doesn't necessarily been removed because it's backed up, right? But when the user delete, it actually has non-repudiation records. I can delete my folder, but I cannot delete the log that I have for that I delete the folder, right? So let's say that I uploaded something to my OneDrive, my personal OneDrive from the company's computer. It's gonna show that task that I connected to OneDrive, and on Microsoft server, right? Azure is gonna show me that at that point I access the OneDrive and this is the file size and this is the file. When I would share that with, let's say I'm selling the data now, so I'm sharing that with an external user so that way they can quickly go in and download it, and then I quickly delete the folder within the next few minutes, right? So from a company standpoint, you already you can find up all of this information through what their system logs, right? And the network. So if you're monitoring and doing all the right things like textbook materials, right? Then you should be able to see that traffic, what they visit, and so on. But we're not gonna sit there and watch one out of the thousands users that we have, right? So you have to go back and comb it through and then look at the incident, and then now you have to,
Time frame.
yeah, you have to make sure that when you subpoena it through the cloud company, Microsoft can take a long time, right? The urgency in this, So what we need to do is we need to disable the user or that account that the user access. So when that user authenticate through someone else's account, you should be able to see that, on your authentication server. And if that person is not at work at that moment, that should raise a flag. That person is logged in when and where. Sometimes that can be done remotely as well, through remote server. All kinds of situation that you're gonna see on that data leak happen. So forensic comes in, and then that's part of incident response. Right now, you have to go in and look at all the logs. You have to look at all the systems. You have to put down when and where and how, right? But in the meantime, if you can't find that person continues to do it, and so the holes get deeper and deeper. But if you already know like that account's access, I would have that person change the password or disable that account temporarily. And find out, right? Whenever assessment for a company, when I see that they have a universal account that they use to share, for example, right, like you have a manufacturing company on the manufacturing floor, they might have one user account that everybody use. That's a big no-no for me, right? That's a huge audit. You cannot be doing that because we can't track who's doing what. So whenever you see that, that should be a first fix. It's priority. Okay, next. So you can go to Intelligence Reputation Center. And I hope they haven't changed the link. I didn't test it. Okay, so this is kind of cool. It's gonna give you the reputation of the domain and the IP information. Okay. And then we can search for this. Who owns this, You use it every day. Start with a G, end with an E. Yes. So when you put all the 8s in, right? 8.8.8.8, this is the public IP, and Google register for this. They not just this one, right? The range of it as well, but you can look at the domain information. So this is going to show you how you can gather information on the domain using a website. And then it tells you DNS match. Yes, DNS.google. And it's registered to Google Inc. Now, sometimes they also block some of the information that's shared to these websites or tools. So now you're going to see that the volume of change hasn't changed, spam level, email volume. So this is good for like web server based information. So if you go down, there's some additional addresses that are related. So the activities you would see, right? So there's neutral, and then this one is good. The one that we were looking for is good. So we have a host name, we have a domain, we have the owner for that particular network, and the sender IP reputation. So look at that page. And it's good. Sometimes you get the unknown. So there's ratings. There's who is tab. I don't think this mechanism works too well on the website. And then the email volume history. Now it doesn't necessarily, so it's to google.com, right? So related child domains and subdomain and exchange server for that might not also include. So next we can take a look at the vulnerability information from Talos Intelligence. And then there's your 0 days, right? Tons. So an attacker can research a particular type of 0 day and then capitalize on it. So it tells you to visit this site and then click on 0 day report button and for the software vendor and reported vulnerability. I think you can view it already here, but you can look at the entire report by clicking this. And it's going to give you more of a detailed list or the more of the longer list. And then these are the vendors, right? So if I'm interested in something with NVIDIA, that's also shown here, AMD. So you can go down the list and that changes time to time, right? Mouse site, TP-Link, PEP-Link, there are tons. So if you go to the next page, you would see others. Level 1. I knew someone that worked at level 1. Probably not there anymore. Any question? Google. So it doesn't mean that it's a company. Well, if you see them on the list, does it really mean that it's a bad company? Not necessarily. A lot of the things we use have 0 day vulnerability because there are certain flaws in the design, and in order to override, you might design something to get things to work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad company, right? Over a long period of time, yeah, reputation can change, credibility for that organization might be impacted. And there's legal aspect too, right? Like regulations that you're not following to make sure that you upkeep the security. But you would see a vast amount of different companies, new or old or in existence. That happens a lot. Now, this is disclosed, right? There are companies that don't disclose their vulnerability. And there's regulation to really protect information about that, right? So next we're going to talk about model that would help you in highlighting the relationship between the elements and the security events. So here it talks about modeling. We touch on this. But when you assess the capability, you look at the resources, the intent, and how the ability of the threat actor. Their skill sets, knowledge, the capability. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a logical threat. It could be a physical threat. Right? Like someone bombing a building. Okay. So under the behavior assessment, what you see is you would see the common frameworks for behavior assessment. Mitre is common on there, right? So if you click on that link, it lists tactics, techniques, common knowledge. It's well organized. Then you have the diamond model of intrusion analysis. This would give you a sequence where how they deploy and the capability of the target. So I put down the picture for it. That's what it looks like. This would help you look at the relationship between the elements and the events. So some model is better than others. So if you know some of the common models out there, that's going to help you as an analyst. Remember that we just don't just combat threats, right? You have to really interpret some information and be able to derive solutions. So the answer for number 12, what type of model that helps analysts discover more information and highlight relationship between elements and events? That's going to be your diamond model of intrusion analysis. You can search for that and read the practice behind it. Now, if you're looking at the kill chain model from Lockheed Martin, and if you ever looked into Lockheed, they are government contracted. So they have a thing called the kill chain model. This is very popular. This is really related to more on ethical hacking or even attack. So the first step in that, right, the first stage in all attack model is really recon. Finding information, doing your homework, research. The more information that you gather that's accurate, the better along you will be in the new stages. And this kind of tied to CIS41A. Okay, so in recon, you would select a target and research that target and gather all the information about that target as possible. Could be social media, right? Google dorking, using software tools. Talking to people about that particular target. That could be a person or a company. And we don't use the knowledge and skills to do evil, right? Because we are ethical. Remember what I said before, there's that gray area. You are only do what's asked to be done and make sure that you agreed and they signed. Everything is verified and signed, right? You don't do anything before the signature and the agreement.
Do you know that please spell that?
Yes.
There must be a lot, no?
Sometimes they say, oh, you kind of know how to do this. Can you do this for me?
Nope.
Right? Not even for friends, family members.
This kind of.
Right? If you decided to volunteer some of your time to do it, make sure you write out an agreement, sign, date it, and have a witness, because don't want to come back and haunt you later. I'm going to give you a quick example. Someone is asking you to investigate, right? Look into their network information because they want to look at what their kids are looking at, what their husband or wife is looking at, and so on, because you know how to do this. So you scan the network, you write down the information, so-and-so accessing at a certain time. Somebody in that family can come back and report it to law enforcement, right? Privacy issues that you are looking into it. You were not authorized to be on their network to look at their private information and so on. And then it becomes your problem then, right? So.
That honest?
Huh?
Personal acts.
Oh, a personal acts, many times.
I never thought about that. How bad can you get a joke? Oh,
Can be bad.
yeah, weird.
Computer abuse, if the person can come, the person who asked you can turn around and say, I didn't really ask you to look that much into it, right? And then now it becomes a computer abuse issue where you are jeopardizing their network and all of that. So the scope of your work needs to be the scope of your work, and it needs to be a written agreement. And even when you sign it, you got to make sure that you have a witness. Right, harvest email addresses so we can find out who's sending information in and out. identify employees and social media networks, collect press releases. Award contracts, government award contracts is publicly shared. Conference attendees, those are some of the things. Even job engine, right? In the other class, I mentioned that you can harvest information from for people who are looking for work or the companies are looking for certain candidates. Discover internet facing servers. Web servers are easily found, so you can find them. You can find DNS records, MX records, lots and lots more. In this class, we're gonna tap a little bit into it, but not in depth as 27B, where we would operate as a pen tester for most part. But in this class, we're gonna use information for analysis purposes. So there are certain tools that we would use. So for detection recon, these are the things that you need. You need to look at the visitor logs for the website. So let's say that I'm looking to gather information for that web server. Okay. So you can find alerts and logs and historical searching on that website. You can also use browser analytics in web administration. It is a way that you can build your website, a feature that you can put in to look at which browser, like, so for example, I'm using Safari to access that website. It's going to track, right? Safari was used at that time, or Chrome or Edge or Firefox. That's something that you can incorporate for the web development side. And then to really combat the people who are reconning you is you would use the detection for browsing and browsing behavior for recon. Because the people who are gathering information, they're browsing information a little bit differently. So the behavior for that is different than your normal user that are just using the website. Then you would prioritize your defense around specific technology and people for a certain technique. In my opinion, recon is the biggest stage, okay? Because you kind of have to use it to build the foundation of your attack. So that's the important stage, is the first stage. It's part of planning and in order to execute it, because you can go one step up and if it doesn't work, you go back to this. You have to do the information gathering all over again. Any question? So one of the skills that I see that all the students here, when I look at their resume that's missing, is research. Whenever that I get a resume from a student that they put and soft skills is really important, right? Written communication, you see why here, right? Analysis type of knowledge and skill sets goes a long way, like statistics. So some of the keywords that you need to put in for this type of job, technical stuff is good. And the technical tools that you learn and use, you need to put the tools, okay? Because you would be like, aspire to be a pen tester. That's your objective on your resume. And then I see nothing of pen testing on your skill sets. Then you have to follow that up with the skills, right? Kali Linux is not clear enough because Kali Linux is always changing and the tools are always changing. So you need to put Recon NG, right? Airmon, stuff like that in there. That's work, so the things that you learn in class, re-practice it and put it in there, right? Product that you use is important in this industry. So when a manager, when they look at that and expect them to ask you interview question on it if you put it on there. Okay? I've had former students that put things on there and then when they got the interview, they asked them the question on how to use that tool. And they were like, oh, it's been a while and I forgot. Right? Or I only did it once in class. That's not good enough. So want to make sure that we re-practice. Okay. So why does proactive threat hunting essential in the organization? Because it requires you to continually advance. That means fix the posture, right? More than fix is to upkeep it, maintain it, and prepare the organization for better security. So that means that your organization security posture by leveraging mature threat modeling and analysis functions to reduce overall risk of compromise. So if you want to win some interview questions, right? They ask you, why should I hire you as a security analyst? You answer them exactly that. Because I want to implement proactive threat hunting strategies so that way I can, right, help you leverage mature threat modeling. They're going to be like, wow. To reduce risk for your organization. And they're going to say, how? You can say, you know, I would start with reconning. You just go through the phases of risk assessment and pen testing. So pen testing first and then risk assess. So in chapter 3, it's gonna go a little bit more in depth in recon. I think I'm beating this topic to death for those of you who are taking both of my classes, right? So like we mentioned before you perform anything or start planning and doing all that stuff, I know you're excited because engagement means pay, and pay could be a lot, right? Sometimes could be in the thousands, but don't do anything unless you're permitted, and make sure that it is an agreement, right? That is signed and even witnessed. And on that agreement, it needs to be specific, right? So they would state the scope of your work. These are the systems that you are going to assess, examine, or pen test, whatever that you want to call it. These are the systems that you're going to analyze. So make sure that that's stated on the agreement. Their network, right, is not good enough. Like the entirety of the network, a segment of the network, what is it, right? So be specific. You might not have a legal advisor to be able to look at that. So if you work for a security firm, before they send you out to do that, they already examined that and the agreement is there, and they would specify that you are the analyst that's going to be handling the job, and so and so and so, your role, your title, and everybody signs. But if it's you're contracted, let's say that, you know, someone hires you to do that, make sure that you read, right, everything that's on the agreement before you sign. Because sometimes people just scheme through, oh, responsibility, right, scope, and then, you know, the money, and then sign, right? That's not good enough. Because all the liability and the information is there, right? If you cannot find things, what's the consequences? So there are types of tools that you can use for active and passive reconnaissance. Active is when we directly gathering information from that system. Sometimes it would likely that it would see you. Passive reconnaissance is when we're indirectly gathering information. For example, if I want to find out where you live, active recon would be like asking you directly, where do you live? But passive recon would be asking your friends where you live, right? Or go about finding it other ways. So a way that we can find out system information is actively scanning it, or we would use other tools to kind of find out what it's seen as. So when you're using port scanner like Nmap, exploitation toolkit like Metasploit, HPing, dig, command, those are active recon. Likely that it would see who's asking. Right? Your system is asking the other system for its information. So it's gonna see who's asking. Your passive recon packet sniffer. Now in my 27B this week, we're gonna talk about when it's legal and when it's not legal. Packet sniffing doesn't necessarily mean that it's legal. It's the intention of what you're using that packet information for, right? And whether you're authorized to sniff is a different story. So, you know, when people are scanning Starbucks network or airport network and things like that, they're doing it illegally, right? But they're doing other things illegally, so they don't care. But when you're scanning someone's network, just know the consequences that they could use that against you if they find out you're scanning them. Because there are tools in security that we can see who's reconning us. Right? So it's like a catch-22. Someone's reconning you and you reconning them. You're finding out their information on what they're finding out about you. Right? So you can use whois, and then you can use specialized search engine, and some of you know that Shodan is the one that we prefer to use for IoT and systems that are connected. But there are other search engines. So in the next part, we can do, I'll do this with you. This one's easy. So if we want to look up the DNS information for Microsoft, right? Sometimes they block it, sometimes it depends on the domain. So if you open up your command prompt for the next step, and you would do nslookup microsoft.com. So let me pull this down. So some of you are still working on the other ones. So your destination or your target is following nslookup, and it would tell you, right? Here is my DNS. And then following that, you would see Microsoft information. So the information that's displayed, right? You have your DNS information, and then your DNS, that's RCCD server IP right there. And then for the non-authoritative answer for Microsoft.com, you have the addresses that are related to that, your external domain. Any question? So now what we can do is we will try to look for the MX record, which is Microsoft Exchange that's used for mail server. So instead of using just nslookup and Microsoft.com, I would put in the dash query mx Microsoft.com. So you want to specify your parameter of the record that you're searching. So when you do that, it will tell you the preference information from that domain that is a mail exchanger, and that's where it is. Okay, that record is belong to this. And then the internet address. So when you find this kind of information, we would write it down, right? I'm only asking a couple of questions, but when you're looking for information, you want to write down the detailed information. So the priority level for the MX record, 0 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. 0 is used for routing and 10 is used for validating ownership. Question. So this is a way that we can find information in command prompt in Windows command line about a DNS or a domain that is publicly available. We know that Microsoft also have, mail servers, hence live.com, outlook.com, microsoft.com, and so on. So that ties back to the DNS. I think they migrated live and the others that they were hosting back into, right? I think there was notification that they had merged some of them into Outlook. So that way they can retire some of those servers. Because imagine if you have thousands of users and they have such large storage. Okay. Okay, next part, it's gonna go over your scnsoft.com. And this is gonna gather, we can use this to gather some information. Let's see if they have that enable feature. So this is just the reason why I chose this company, because it's easy. So let's pretend that this is our target company, right? We are targeting this company. And so when you go through the website, go through the pages, just to look at information and write it down, right? So put down their name and the industry that they're in. And then look at the locations. Are they just in one location or multiple locations? Find out their organizational hierarchy, like who's the executive, how many executive, and so on. Sometimes that is helpful because maybe from a bad attacker standpoint, I want to target the executive with phishing or spear phishing. That potentially would be the ideal. But from an ethical hacker standpoint or an analyst standpoint, we want to identify those because they might be, they play important roles in decision making. Not only that, they might play a good role for security measures and then related press information and partners. So when we visit the site, right, we can look, they are an IT service company. And you can see the type of services they provide, like web development, software development, outsourcing, consulting, support. So IT services company. And then some of the solutions that they can implement, the industry that they worked with. Right? So the numbers here, the contact for sales, I think that comes to, that's US number. And then you can click contact us to see if you can find some information. So here it gives you an overview to have a, you know, kind of like an overall size of the company. That they are ISO certified. So they follow regulations and they're accredited. And then there's some published information here. You got the director information, some customer information. And then if you under the contact, you would see their offices. So you got some US location and other country locations. Decent size company actually for IT. And then your partners and clients, you see that with the customer list, and then at the top, you also see some industry information. So coming back here, under the contact the company, you would see some of their clients. Peekaboo. Lixar. So on. And then you can read the original. It actually tells you all the details about who's validating for them. I would not put that here, but hey. So what I'm trying to show you is you can find a lot of information about the organization and its people and its role in various industry by just looking at the website. And you should always do this before your interview anyways, right? But in Recon, a lot of times we want to access what's publicly available first to kind of give you information, but now we can validate it. So we will want to, you know, use operators in Google search and go through each of the link to see if the information match up. If it's parallel or it's different. So some of the partners that you see here, they're a partner with Microsoft, right? Microsoft partnership is harder to establish. You have to be a gold member to sell Microsoft. So if they're an IT service company that sell Microsoft, you have to be a gold member with Microsoft. And then there are other companies that you would see, like Salesforce. Some of them are vague here, but and then the last question asks you, how can an organization prevent active recon activities? So if you don't want people to recon you, right, you just make sure that you reduce external exposure of services. So that way it's harder to footprint. Now, when you're looking at social media company like AKA or especially like Facebook, you can't really recon a lot of their public technical information because they have a company that shield it. They pay extra money for the security services so that way they would shield some public IP information, their server information, so you can't find it. Right? That's doable. So they just reduce exposure of things that could be impacting them, right? And then use internet service provider to limit or stop probes. You can do that. That will be, you know, so when you have a business account, and they're hosting your servers and things like that, you can have that feature so that way they can't probe. Like I said, you can block some information. You can stop people from pinging you, right? Use monitoring or alerting system. Okay, so as we were finishing this, right, make sure that we go through chapter 3. I condense it down and I'm only answering the question, but read the notes. If you have the book, you can read the book. And do the end of the chapter questions. Those are always useful. So it goes over host enumeration, passive and active footprinting, harvesting data and DNS. We did some of that. We didn't use dig because it's Linux. But you can try it in your Kali. So it also gives you more information, like you can use logs. You can analyze intrusion detection system and all the traffic. So network traffic and security system traffic information will be useful. And then for the passive recon, I really think that CAPTCHA is just for bots purposes, right? Yeah, we all know that. And then, you know, I heard that all the picture that you click, you actually really tagging that picture for the greater good. For the greater good. You can also blacklist system. You can, so if you want to answer the last question, you can look at the last page of the notes. It's going to tell you all the answers there. But coming back to this, you would see. Any question? Did we miss any question that you need me to scroll back up? And okay, so I think the people who got pizza, they wanted to eat. So let's give them a break. Let me stop recording. It's okay. No, hold on. You're hungry.